And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Arcega in Washington. Well, the world is watching and wondering the impact a new commander-in-chief could have on U.S. relations and influence around the world. That's because many of the programs championed by the Obama administration, such as climate change mitigation, free trade, and foreign aid, are probably at risk now that Donald Trump is in the White House. What's certain right now is that overseas assistance will come under closer scrutiny in this new administration. VOA senior correspondent Steve Herman has more on that from the U.S. State Department.
During his confirmation hearing, senators quizzed Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson about how to prevent assistance from the United States, the biggest global donor, from being siphoned or stolen by corrupt regimes. For President-elect Donald Trump and his administration, the priority is likely to be on giving foreign aid to countries to enhance property rights, the rule of law, and to fight corruption.
Too much of the foreign aid given by the Western countries, U.S., OECD countries, has ended up only securing in power corrupt regimes.
Certain types of programs that are the ire of religious conservatives are also nearly certain to face review, with the White House and both houses of Congress now under Republican control.
Certainly there are worries, especially in areas of family planning and reproductive health, especially in the areas of HIV/AIDS, prevention and treatment.
So, how will a new administration impact U.S. policy and our relationships with other countries around the world? For more on that, I'm joined by VOA Senior Diplomatic Correspondent Steve Herman, whose report you just heard, and once again by our White House correspondent Cindy Saine. I thank you both for being here. So, Steve, a lot of countries obviously depend on U.S. aid. Can we expect the U.S. to become a little bit more tight-fisted in the coming years?
I think what we're going to see at State Department is a leaner, perhaps meaner, and more muscular State Department with priorities shifting, as was pointed out in the piece, maybe less of an emphasis on some of these, what conservatives see as these liberal rights arenas, and getting more into pushing diplomacy for policy objectives of the United States.
Kind of an America First policy, right? I mean, that is what he's been promising. So, Cindy, outside of foreign aid, there is U.S. leadership around the world. How do our European partners feel about the United States, especially after comments made by President Trump that NATO is obsolete and obviously requires some changes? How do they feel about that?
This really caused a lot of alarm and consternation in European capitals. And these are views that President Trump has actually held for a long time. Even in the 80s, he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times saying that, I think what President Trump believes is that the United States has been getting a raw deal through these international alliances, that the United States has been paying for, let's say, Germany's security, South Korea's security, and that other countries should pay their share, and this fits back into the America First policy. And that has upset a lot of Europeans, and comments that Trump made also more or less putting German Chancellor Merkel on the same level with Russia, saying, well, for now, I'll trust them both. That also did not sit well with Germany being such a close ally. And then the French coming to Merkel's aid and saying, and Merkel saying, well, we have our own destiny in our own hands here in Europe.
So Steve, what happens if this comes to pass, that there are changes made to NATO, to this? What does the future of this alliance look like, especially if Donald Trump resets relations with Russia?
Well,
politically,
as Cindy pointed out, there's tremendous nervousness in Europe right now, and Europe is going through some elections this year that could change the landscape there as well. As far as NATO, it's almost inconceivable that there's going to be a fundamental change with NATO. But there are a lot of analysts in this town at the think tanks and in European capitals who feel that based on the comments that Donald Trump has made and the actions that Vladimir Putin has taken, that we have essentially now seen or are seeing the end of the international order that has existed since the end of World War II. And there's a huge question mark as to what that new order is going to look like. Are Trump and Putin going to be able to put together some sort of Washington-Moscow led alliance at the expense of the traditional relationships with the Europeans? How does China fit into all of this? These are huge questions, and nobody has answers right now.
So how does China fit into all this? I know Donald Trump has said some tough comments about China policy, suggesting that perhaps even the one China policy that involves Taiwan is negotiable, something the Chinese are not very happy about.
Right. The Chinese leaders have signaled that that is not negotiable. And they are also warning that protectionism and getting out of global trade agreements would be a very bad move. I think equivocating it to locking yourself up in a dark room to protect yourself, and then you're cutting off air and light. So I think the Chinese are watching carefully to see what President Trump does, and perhaps prepared to move into the vacuum if the U.S. pulls out of international trade agreements like the TPP, then I think China would be only too willing to insert itself into that role, and also on climate change as being a global leader.
Steve, does this suggest a lack of understanding of world affairs or a complete upending of the world as we know it under President Trump?
Well, there are a lot of people who believe in a complete upending. And as far as China goes, despite that phone call with President Tsai, one thing that Donald Trump has been, as a businessman, has been very pragmatic, looking at the bottom line. Rex Tillerson, presumably the Secretary of State, has also approached things in his business career. And when they weigh Taiwan versus China and the very deep economic interdependence that China and the United States have, I would feel some comfort in that the one China policy is going to stay intact. China's been happy with it, Taiwan's been happy with it, and the U.S. has been happy with it. But who knows? We could be in for very unpredictable times.
Cindy, as much as we like change, we have to prepare for this kind of change. Could that hurt U.S. influence overseas?
I think it could. And one thing that I wanted to say about Europe and fears that you're in European capitals about a fundamental shift in U.S. priorities. One of the things that outgoing or former President Obama did before leaving office was to send a lot of U.S. troops and to Poland and to Norway, right on the border of Russia. So that will be one thing to watch. Does President Trump remove those troops?
Okay.
The Russians consider that very provocative, of course.
And I will expect both of you to be watching very closely. Thank you so much, Steve and Cindy. It's time for another quick break, but when we come back, after 2 historic terms in office, a final look back at President Barack Obama's legacy. But first, a reminder, we do want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.